Ni no God, lixsʔala, lixsʔala, wise ones, advisors, respected ones. Indigenous education, like our woven cedar mats, is and always has been intertwined in our lives and our ancestors' lives. It is our way of living. Lixsʔala inuch. We are the Lixsʔala. Huasam village of Salmon River, circa early 1900s. A picture that shows we traveled by canoe and had big houses that we lived in. This is one of our villages of the Lixsʔala. My great-grandmother was born here, and her father spoke at the McKenna McBride Royal Commission in 1914. I remember reading this and thinking, he is trying to explain about potlatches, his trap lines, and getting permission to leave the reserve. Although this is but a 45-minute drive, I have never been to this old village site. I am going to visit this special place this summer. I think of the rich history, the stories, and the songs that are connected to this land, and what I want to continue to teach my children and my grandchildren. It always amazes me how we strategically placed our village sites for food to sustain us, for connection to Mother Earth for spirituality, and with a deep respect-based relationship to the land. When we berry pick in the summer, we are very close to this land, and I always feel our ancestors surrounding us. Lixsʔala, advising, teaching. I chose this word for this picture as he, Billy Asud, was lixsʔala from the Ninogad, the wise ones. This is important as it shows how things were passed down from one generation to the next. Intergenerational knowledge transfer, our form of education. Our old leaders were groomed, and they were watched by the old people, and they were taught the important ways. Chief Billy Asud was born in 1867 in a communal big house at Cape Mudge. He came from the Eagle clan and the Wolf clan. He was the son of Clem Colas, also known as Charlie Asud. He was the nephew of the great chief Wamish. As a young boy, he displayed great physical strength and was an excellent speaker. Because of this, he was groomed and had an intense training period, learning and mastering complex details of the Kwakwaka'wakw ceremonial life. One of his greatest achievements was to help move his people from a traditional lifestyle to that of a highly industrialized and competitive society. As a young boy, my dad learned many valuable things from Chief Billy Asud, including place names, stories, and most importantly, service to community. My dad and my mom were very lucky to grow up in Cape Mudge Village, surrounded by elders that modeled what a positive community looked like, where everyone worked together and looked out for one another. And they often tell me stories about these olden days and what it looked like. They always say they were surrounded by beautiful elders. I want to acknowledge our village and leader to show the resiliency that we had. They continued to potlatch underground to keep our sacred ceremonies alive, even though it was illegal. He recorded hundreds of songs now in the archives, some that are 1,000 years old. My great-grandfather is in this picture. When I see this picture, I wonder how they felt about the changing times. We were fishermen. We looked after the land. We were stewards. We had a deep connection and respect for the earth and all living things. Our language is deeply connected to the land. When we hunted, we used every part of the animal, and we would only take what was needed. All the food gathered would be shared in the community. The waterways were well looked after, as well as the land. Each family had a responsibility to look after the land, streams or rivers, fish camps or hunting grounds, or berry picking spots. They also took care of our sacred waterways. Wealth was not determined by how much money you had, but by how much money you gave away. And in each nation we had ceremonies, powerful ceremonies, and we had protocols and laws, and the business took place in our gyuktsi, the big houses. The women of our communities were strong, loving, and caring. My great-grandmother is in this picture amongst many of the women in our community. When I look at this picture, I am reminded of how they cherished the children of the village. I was very fortunate to have lived with my great-grandmother until I was 10 years old. I remember her stories, her love, and her presence. She used to hold small ceremonies in her living room. They would close the curtains, and she would teach dancing to her granddaughters and grandsons, and she would name them traditionally. They made sure that children, all children, were made to feel special and sacred. The whole community had a hand in raising the children of the community. Each child had gifts to share, and it would be the grannies that recognized these gifts. The children would feel loved and protected, and they would be the center of the village. It truly was, it takes a village to raise a child. Getman heat loose with lay Susan Homiskinis. I am sharing this picture, a picture of my great-grandmother's mother, my great-great-grandmother, who taught my great-grandmother language, traditional food preparation, songs, dances, stories, place names of our territory. Since the beginning of time, our indigenous ways of living, our cultural and spiritual practices, our values and our beliefs have been passed on from one generation to the next. We lived in communal houses, immersed in language and our traditional way of living. We hunted, we fished, we had clam gardens, we had berry spots, and we passed this knowledge down from one generation to the next. I am living proof of this intergenerational knowledge transfer. My family hunts, fishes, berry picks, and preserves our traditional foods. Getman heat loose with lay Louise glue James Hovel glue with Lee Buddy. This is my great-grandmother and grandfather, Louise and James, and Uncle Buddy. I mentioned I lived with my great-grandmother when I was a young girl. She taught me stories, she named us, she taught us songs and dances. She was a healer. She could see things. In our language we call this Nawalak. She was gifted with mystical powers. I share this picture as our women were the holders of knowledge. They are the ones to keep records of our ceremonies. This is very important as we still pass this knowledge down today. We know our place in our gyuktsi because of our record keepers. Getman heat loose with lay Lottie Price, Gayuklin lach mimkum lease. This is my great-granny Lottie Price. She came from Village Island. I never knew this great-grandmother, but my dad tells me about her. She was a loving granny, very petite, very strong. I want to share these pictures to show that intergenerational knowledge transfer happened with all of my lixsʔala, my family. My dad learned from this granny, and her husband my dad called Kumai. He came from a place called Metsano, Philip's Arm. He told my dad stories, and my dad shares this knowledge with us. Our flood story is one of these stories. This ties us to the land and connects us. These stories we will continue to pass down to our future generations to come. Getmangagas Ruby Wishlay, my grandmother, the biggest girl in the picture, attended residential school from age 6 to 16 in Kokalitsa, which was a residential school that was situated in Chilliwack. I have been very fortunate in my life to have had this granny teach me things. Storytelling, preserving our traditional foods, language, and just being there for me and my growing family when they were young. The Indian Act was created in 1876. The Indian Act is laws that set out federal government responsibilities for managing reserve lands, money, and other resources. The purpose of the Indian Act was and is assimilation. The Indian Act defined who qualified as an Indian and who was eligible for status. Also, part of the Indian Act brought in elected band councils, which in turn abolished or ruined our traditional systems of governance. In 1884, the federal government banned the potlatch ceremony. In 1885, a pass system was put in place, meaning no Indigenous person could leave the reserve without a pass from the Indian agent. And in 1894, a change to the Indian Act made it mandatory for Indian children between the ages of 7 to 16 to attend residential school. It was later changed in 1908 for children ages 6 to 15 years of age. It was this law that allowed the RCMP to arrest parents if they did not surrender their children to go to residential school. In 1851, they made amendments to the Indian Act. Women were allowed to vote and run in band elections, and they lifted the potlatch ban, and we were able to practice our ceremonies. Although women were allowed to vote and run in the band elections, our people could not vote until 1960 in federal elections. This is the time that the 60s scoop took place. Indigenous children were removed from their families by child welfare that deemed the families unfit to look after their children. Many of the children taken were adopted out by non-Indigenous people that did not understand the importance of language and culture. just like the children taken to residential school. Feelings of displacement, loss of language, culture, and identity happen to our 60 scoop children. The lifespan of residential schools, 165 years, over 130 schools across Canada, and in terms of families, 7 generations had gone and attended residential school. We are on a journey to reclaim our language, our old ways, so we can continue to have and share intergenerational knowledge. Today we are grateful to the survivors of residential school, grateful for you sharing your stories, grateful to the healing and the healing to come. Our potlatch ceremonies included lavish gift giving. They marked important events and were used to honor and to validate names, privileges, and social rank. Intricate, detailed society to pass down knowledge and our governance. Centuries of colonization and harmful government policies such as residential schools, segregation, and discrimination led to the erosion of traditional styles of governance. Yet all across the country, Indigenous communities continue to work towards independence, self-sufficiency, and building a more just and equal relationship with the government. Decolonization rode in every community, like the video we watched, but the opposite. Our ways are whole. They have always been. We have survived and we have thrived since time immemorial. We had it right. We had a deep connection to the land and we respected it. We are survivors and we have resisted assimilation and we adapt. We have held on to our values, our stories, our songs, our dances, our important ceremonies, our important place names. I mentioned storytelling in this presentation a number of times because it was one of our ways of teaching, especially because most of our stories were taught orally. It was how our values, our respect for the land, and all living things were passed down. We continue to grow, and we are getting stronger and stronger. I share this beautiful lixsʔala to remind us of all the good things we are, all the good things our ancestors kept alive, and we will continue to do so. That is all.